I'm talking about this.
Why not just print more money? This week we have for you a timely and thoughtful question, which is why we can't just print more money to fix the stressed economy. Why is this question important today? Since the pandemic began, the federal government has allocated $5.3 trillion in federal relief, money needed to help the economy weather its worst downturn since the Great Depression. That aid has sent the federal debt as a share of the economy to its highest level since World War II, and it's likely to grow even bigger. Congress is working on a $2.3 trillion infrastructure proposal from President Joe Biden that would support the economy longer term. Even without the new infrastructure spending, the federal debt as a share of the economy is estimated to almost double in the next 30 years, from 129% now to more than 200% because of rising healthcare costs and interest on borrowing. Economists are fond of saying there's no such thing as a free lunch, which means someone eventually has to pick up the tab for our feast. That responsibility likely will fall to Main Street business and consumers in the form of higher taxes. In the spirit of today's question, a small but growing chorus of economists and policymakers recently have thrown their support behind an unconventional idea called modern monetary theory, a full-throated endorsement of printing money to fix the economy. The theory's supporters argue that wealthy countries like the US, which are able to issue debt in their own currency, never have to worry about spending too much. They can never go bankrupt because they can always print more money. How does it work? There's not an actual printing press or consortium of elves in the basement of a country's finance division churning out new dollar bills to fund government spending. Instead, money creation happens with a few strokes of a computer keyboard at a country's central bank. To print money to fund its spending, or more formally to monetize debt, the government directs its treasury to issue debt in the form of bonds, which are purchased by the country's independent central bank, the Federal Reserve in the case of the US. These purchases effectively increase the amount of money in circulation, which makes its way to businesses and consumers through the banking system in the form of cheap or easy-to-get loans. Theoretically, the Fed could buy bonds indefinitely. That would allow the US to just repay old debt with new debt without ever paying it all off. In practice, the Fed uses bond purchases to encourage spending and investment. Currently, the central bank is buying $80 billion in US treasuries and $40 billion in government-backed mortgage securities each month to stimulate the economy. So, what could go wrong? In a word, inflation. All those newly printed dollars chasing too few goods produced in a still recovering economy can cause prices to rise. The more money that's made, the less valuable it is. But just because the money is less valuable doesn't mean people get paid more money. That means things get more expensive. Until last month, the rate of inflation was actually shrinking in the first 2 months of this year. The US Consumer Price Index, minus volatile food and energy prices, fell to 1.3% in February before jumping to 1.6% in March, data last week showed. The Fed likes to see inflation at a Goldilocks level of 2%, not too hot to overheat the economy, not too cool to be a drag on economic growth. As we head into spring, several recent indicators point to strong consumer demand, which could push up inflation from its current modest levels. Last month, growth in retail sales soared past what economy watchers thought was likely, hitting nearly 10%. Retailers got a boost from the $1,400 stimulus checks that began landing in consumer bank accounts in March. But there is also evidence that Main Street is spiffing up its wardrobe and going for a night out as the economy returns to normal and more people are vaccinated. Clothing purchases were up 18%. Spending on food and drink rose 13.4%. But here comes trouble. Surveys of the manufacturing and service sectors warn of shortages in lumber, semiconductors, and even workers. These logjams in production could spill into what consumers pay for, goods and services, causing prices to rise. Strong demand and short supply are fertile ground for inflation, especially in the presence of massive government spending and near rock-bottom interest rates. So, why not again? An economist who has probably been asked this thousands of times will look at you and simply state inflation. Inflation is the price rise of things we buy over time. Inflation applies to everything from a banana to an entire house, and it affects how much money we all have and other social and economic influences. If we all have more money than stuff, everyone jumps in the car like, "Get in, loser, we're going shopping." But the number of things available to buy stays the same, and the result, prices rise. That's one way inflation and hyperinflation happen. But why can't we just print more money and control inflation? If the banks start printing more money, it increases the supply of money floating around the economy. You might say that, yes, isn't that the point? That is the point. The challenge is now, there's more money for the same amount of stuff for people to buy. If you had $100 in your account, and overnight the RBA prints money, your $100 is now worth less because there's more $100 floating around. Everyone is using their $100 to buy things, which means demand for those things increases. As a result, businesses may put their price of things up. Printing money would be the result of the RBA making decisions on supply and demand in Australia. When we print money, the supply of money increases, demand for goods increases. If the supply of goods stays steady but doesn't increase in line with demand, then prices increase. What you bought with $100 yesterday costs more than $100 today. Australia's already done it. In 2020, we actually did sort of print money. To stimulate the economy, the RBA bank lowered the cash rate to encourage banks like us to lower interest rates. Lower interest rates have a similar effect to printing money because more people are encouraged to take out loans for things like cars and homes. That creates more demand. But what if there aren't more homes to buy? Prices increase, and inflation happens when buyers, demand, are all trying to buy the existing houses, supply. Why do the banks need to keep an eye on inflation? Inflation isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it needs to be managed so it doesn't spiral out of control. The RBA keeps an eye on inflation to keep things steady. Let's pretend last year you paid $1 for one banana at your local market. This year, the banana is $15 because inflation is out of control. You earn $30 an hour, so a banana went from costing you a small amount, roughly 3% of what you earn each hour, to costing you 50% of what you earn each hour. You decide not to buy the banana, obviously. You and a lot of other people stop paying for bananas. The banana industry shrinks, and people who work in it are given less work. This is an extreme example called hyperinflation, but it explains why the RBA's aim for inflation is to keep it steady and predictable. Their goal is to keep inflation between 2% and 3%. For example, if your banana costs $1 last year, the RBA makes sure that this year it'll cost between $1.02 and $1.03. You're okay with that, because in an average year, your wages have risen slightly and the price is stable. If the price is stable, you continue to buy bananas. The market owner continues to order them. The banana industry increases slightly, so hires more people and produce more bananas. But what made the imaginary banana rise to $15 in 1 year? In 2011, this actually happened and there was a simple answer. Cyclone Yasi hit Queensland, wrecking banana plantations and decimating the number of bananas available to buy in Australia. Bananas rose from a few dollars per kilo to $15 per kilo because there were hardly any bananas available, a reduction in supply. But the same amount of Australians still wanted their bananas, demand, and so businesses increased the prices. This is a major driver of inflation and hyperinflation. When more people want the same amount of stuff because more isn't being made quickly enough. In that example, banana demand outstripped banana supply and prices rose. When you print money, it can have the same outcome. People have more money and supply stays consistent, which equals prices rise. There's actually multiple factors that impact inflation across the economy, and most of the time they all cross over and make the real cause hard to point to. Some of them are government regulation, tax cuts, trade, higher production costs for businesses. Adding to all this, printing money and the actual causes of inflation are hotly contested. Do we encourage you to go down an internet rabbit hole on the causes of inflation? Our resident economist says yes. The rest of the team say no. So, to answer the seemingly simple question, in some ways the government already is printing money. It's spending more and borrowing more, and its independent but accommodative central bank is buying a portion of that debt in the form of bonds. However, there are limits. If inflation veers upwards, it could lead to a spiral of ever-increasing prices that is really hard to control. The money we have could become less valuable. Inflation is still quite modest and not a concern despite our record federal debt. But keeping it in check in the long run requires more than just printing money. We need to figure out how to pay for all our spending soon so that your generation isn't burdened by your parents' debt. With that, we end today's video. Don't forget to join in next time for more such interesting content.